in mind, and obviously something to be excited about. In terms of today, we are going to be dealing with a few different topics, but there's going to be a lot more Photoshop in today's lesson than there would have been in our previous two. But of course, we have to get through a little bit of the theory side of it, and I'm just very nicely going to talk about the pixel. We're going to talk a little bit about enhancing our images, and then our demonstrations of our tonal adjustments and our color adjustments. So that's what you've got ahead of you today. So let's have a look, folks, as I said, what you will all be able to do by the end of today. That's the goal to keep in mind, and that is the goal is to enhance your images, okay? So obviously we can take any sort of standard image, okay? This is a nice photo, okay? It's just a bench and some grass, but there's a lot of green in this, or there's a lot of blue or cyan in the image itself, so it's very easy to edit because we have very similar colors in this, okay? So what I can do with my Photoshop skills is look at this grass and enhance it. I can make it come to life very quickly by just basically choosing the green color and saturating it with a bit of more color, just making it a lot more vibrant. So this is done very quickly in Photoshop. It's the uSaturation adjustment which we'll be looking at today. Now, the joys of it is that we can actually be as creative as we want. We can take it a step further if we have to. And again, with one simple adjustment, it'll take you about 5 minutes to learn, folks. It's about 4 clicks. We can change our images. We can completely change the color altogether. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, along with changing the shadows and the tones in your images, brightening your images, darkening your images as well. And once we get into our later lessons, you will be using what you learned today as we progress forward. So lesson 3 is an important one because we'll be using all of our adjustments in lesson 4, in lesson 5, in lesson 6 and 7 and so on, folks. So it's a really important skill to learn. So I'm going to talk about the pixel. So folks, who's who? I mean, I'd say majority of you on here do understand what the pixel is. Quick type in, folks, if you know what I'm on about here. Just in case you've never come across the pixel, do not be shy. You can type in and say that you've never heard of the pixel before, and that's perfectly fine. But basically, before we go on to adjusting our images, we need to talk about the pixel, okay? When we're using Photoshop, it's really important to know the fundamentals of digital imagery. A lot of people are saying yes, few knows, few not sures, but majority is yes. Dots on a picture, pretty much. They're squares, but that's the whole idea. But yeah, when it comes to digital imagery, folks, we have to understand its most basic building block, which is the pixel. Now, it's short for picture element. Now, I say that again, short for picture element, because that's actually one of the questions in your final assignment to get your diploma. Very easy question. I'm giving you the answer already in lesson 3. The pixel basically is short for picture element. So all of our images, every single image that we've took ourselves with your camera, whether it be your phone or your DSLR, every image that we download, every image we see on the internet, are all made up of pixels. Okay, because that's the way our digital images are done. So a pixel is a single dot of color and is always a perfect square. It can only ever be a square and only ever be one color. Our images are made up of thousands and thousands of these pixels. They're almost like digital mosaics in that kind of way. Now, this is also similar to how hex codes are chosen for web design, which is something we also do here at Shaw Academy, but if you understand that kind of style of web design, you might have a better grasp of this as well. So basically, each pixel aligns itself in either rows or columns. When we have lots and lots of pixels, they seem to be visually kind of dissolve in what we refer to as a continuous tone image. Okay, so photographs are continuous tone images. All of our photographs are made up of, say, similar colored pixels that have merged in our brains to represent these details. Okay, so they don't look square at all when we're looking at them. In fact, having thousands of these will allow us to see full colored images. Again, as I kind of flick through, what we were actually looking at there was this segment of the image, just zoomed in. That's all it was. So the adjustments that we're going to make in today's lesson, folks, are basically us adjusting our tones, the actual pixels itself, the colors and the tones of the pixels itself. That's all we're going to be doing today. So bear with me. I'm going to jump into Photoshop and try to explain this a little bit quicker as well. So I'll open up an image. So File and Open. And we will just choose something that I know has a lot of color in it. Okay. So there's a lot of grass in here, which is really bright green. Again, we have the sky. So to explain the pixel, I'm just going to grab our zoom tool, just here. And I'm just going to very slowly zoom in on this tree. And as I get closer, you will see that it starts to get a little bit blocky. As I go in more and more, we actually really start to see the pixels in this image, allowing us to pick up on the colors and the shades and the different tones in here of the greens, which is this tree. So if I move down, we'll start seeing a bit of the bark until we eventually look. There's the tree bark and how we can make these colors. Here's the grass. If I stroll up, I'm holding my space bar to flick around fast. If I scroll up, folks, we'll start to get into the sky. So that's a bit of cloud here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out. So again, just choose my minus. And we can see that as I zoom out, we are on the cloud. And the tree starts to come in. And that's basically our pixels, folks. What we see as a lot of individual colored squares or dots aligned in rows and columns, so to the left, to the right, in front, as you can see it, our brain itself will basically see the image. But it seems like everybody had a grasp on that, but just in case for the shy people who had never come across the pixel before, this is basically what we're going to edit. So when we actually go into changing the tones or the colors of our image, we can change this green to be whatever color we want. We can change it to be a darker shade of green or a brighter shade of green. And that is with our adjustments. Okay, so for anyone who's never used adjustments in Photoshop before, adjustments are basically used to enhance our images. They can affect things like tonal, which is our black and white, or color, which is obviously our color in our images. Okay. Now, adjustments can be applied destructively and non-destructively. Today, we're going to deal with the destructive adjustments, meaning that we're going to alter the pixels directly. So, in that way, we're actually changing our image completely. And that's why it's destructive, because we actually are changing the original image. Now, when I talk about non-destructive, that's what we're going to look at when we talk about our layers and masking, because we'll be looking at using adjustments with that in a non-destructive manner, which simulates how the image would look if we were to change the color or tones. So for anyone who's never heard of those terms, destructive or non-destructive, focus on the destructive today, and in our next lesson we'll deal with the non-destructive, okay? Now, each adjustment comes with its own sliders and options like the tools that we've used in our previous lesson. So there's a lot we can do with every individual adjustment. There's about 26 different types, I think, at this stage. That might be blend modes. But there's a lot of different adjustments that do a lot of different things for us. Now, for anyone who's dealt with adjustments before, are you more interested in the tonal side of things, or are you more interested in the color adjustments? So I know exactly what I should be focusing on with a little bit more time today, folks. So just a quick type in if you're here for more tonal or color. And of course, I'm going to get those people that are typing in both, like Tim, first person to type in there. But color is taking up both. Both and color seem to be the main one. Tonal. So you know the tonal will be the photographers, I'd say. And the color will be more of the designers. A lot of boats coming in, okay. Absolutely brilliant. So folks, here's a list of the adjustments that you can make to your images. We have a lot of different types. Okay, so there is just general brightness and contrast. There is ways of changing the color with a color balance or a vibrance. And then there's the more creative side of things, like just basically inverting the color in your images. what we're going to focus on today, folks, because obviously there's a lot of adjustments there. I want to focus on the main ones that you will need for your Photoshop, okay? And you can kind of dive into the other ones yourself, but majority of them we will look at as we proceed through these lessons. So here is what we're going to look at, folks, and it's kind of cut into different sections anyway in Photoshop. So we're going to be dealing with our tonal side of things, where we're going to look at brightness and contrast, levels and curves, and then we're also going to deal with our color, which is our vibrance and saturation. At this point, we've already looked at our black and white adjustment anyway in lesson 1, so you kind of understand how we can use the sliders and everything like that to be a little bit more creative. Alright folks, so with that in mind, let's jump straight into tonal adjustments. So our tonal adjustments will affect the tones and shades of an image. We can say the shadows and highlights, or the blacks and whites. It doesn't make a difference. We've got tones and shades, shadows and highlights, blacks and whites. We also have something called midtones, which I will show you when we're dealing with our actual adjustments. So, tonal adjustments can be made with different adjustments, okay? So we can enhance our tonal with different adjustments, each one having a different way to make that adjustment, that enhancement. Okay, and there's obviously more in-depth ways of doing it and more effective ways of doing it. And the main adjustments we will look at are brightness and contrast, levels, and curves. So I have a few images open up here anyway, folks, so we'll just dive straight in. I have 4 images here that we can play around with. I have gone to the courtesy of adding a gradient slider down the bottom here, which will help us all out. Okay, so basically when I'm doing any sort of edits now, this is only for demonstration purposes with yourselves, but as I affect the tones and shades of our images, we will see that the gradient down the bottom here will be affected as well. So it's only for demonstration purposes. You wouldn't do this to your image normally. I've just added it in so we know exactly what we are doing. And I just added it in with the gradient tool, a selection and the layer. I can do it in the Q&A because people always ask, how did I do it? And I'll do it in the Q&A for you folks, just somebody will need to remind me. Okay, now, so we'll start with this issue, folks. This actual image here of a bridge, black and white. It's not a crazy image, but we will be able to see what we're changing in here. And I'm just going to go to Image, up the very top, Adjustments, and we will have a list of our destructive adjustments that we're going to deal with. So as you can see, folks, they're kind of split up into different categories anyway. So we're going to deal with brightness, levels, and curves first. Now, let's just start with the brightness and contrast. I get a nice pop-up, which I'll place in the top right corner here for everybody. As you can see, it comes with 2 sliders, something to play around with. It's not a very difficult thing to use. It is basically a way of just changing what it says, the brightness and the contrast of the brightness in the image. Okay, so I think everybody kind of understands brightness, but just in case, folks, as I said, keep an eye on the image and keep an eye on the gradient slider down the bottom here. As I move my brightness slider, if I move it to the right, I will brighten the image. By brightening the image, I've also brightened the gradient. So we can see how I have pushed out some of the darker tones, allowing a lot more of a bright image to come in. If I go the opposite direction, I will darken the image, and again, we will push out some of the brighter white tones, allowing us to have a darker image. And that's brightness and contrast, folks. It's very, very easy to understand. It's just changing the brightness and the contrast, which will be your midtones. So midtones I'll explain as we go through the lesson anyway, but basically it's a way, if you keep an eye again here, this will be our midtones, the middle tones. And as we change the contrast, we can see that we're stretching out whether it's going to be fully kind of grey toned or whether we're going to remove those kind of tones. So we can see the contrast can be quite nice to play around with to get those kind of stunning images. So we'll just do a preview before and after. This is my base image. And this is with my contrast fully up, and we've brightened the image as well. Now, of course, if you want to take the lazy way out, folks, most of these adjustments will come with a auto option. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can just hit auto, and it'll do it for you. And then you can play around with the sliders if you want to be a little bit more creative as well. What is legacy? Absolutely not a problem, Eddie. So the legacy option, basically I'm using the more up-to-date version of Photoshop. So anything where you see the word legacy means that it will use the kind of older version that was built into Photoshop, like CS6, CS5 going backwards, okay? Now the legacy option, if you keep an eye on my gradient here, okay, we're just going to set these back to 0. As I move the sliders, we can kind of see how the gradient reacts by pushing the color in and out. The legacy does it slightly different, where it clips the color. So it kind of, as you can see, it's more slapping the color on top, I suppose, is a less professional way of saying it, but there is a difference. And this is the way Photoshop, the way the brightness and contrast slider works in the more original way that it was in Photoshop. It was updated a long time ago. I think it was CS5. So if you're CS5 forward, you should have this option. Okay, but you might not have the option to use legacy. You might just be using the newer style of it. Older versions will basically be using the legacy format either way. Okay. Going to cancel that out, folks. Is everybody okay with the brightness and contrast? I don't want to spend too much time on it. It is an extremely easy thing to understand, but I just want to make sure. What exactly does auto do? It's just Photoshop. Photoshop's a tool. So basically, Photoshop will pick up on where the best brightness and contrast should be. It's just the auto option. What's the benefit of using the legacy version? Kim, some people who have been designing for years are stuck in their own ways, and they just kind of like, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of style to it. But I prefer to use the newer method myself. Just having a quick look at the questions here, folks, before I move on. How did I get the gradient bar at the bottom of the photo, Sarah? I will show that in the Q&A because it kind of leads into the next lesson anyway. But I basically just cropped the image down, made a selection, and added a gradient in. It's not a big thing. It's for demonstration purposes anyway. You wouldn't generally do this to your images. Okay, so we've got a dog, we've got a landscape, and we have piano. Okay, we'll go with the landscape. Nice landscape of London. And folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to image, since everyone's okay with the brightness and contrast, and we're going to go to levels. Now, looks a little bit more complicated, but it's a very similar thing to what we were just doing. So levels will allow us to be a little bit more detailed with how we edit the brightness and the contrast of our images. It is basically just a newer version. It's a better version of brightness and contrast. Again, it does come with an auto option anyway. So we can change the image the way we want to. But it comes with a few defaults, presets in here. So if we want, once again, if you want to take the more less creative way out, you can either hit the auto option or you can come in here and use the custom presets. So we can lighten the shadows. We can increase the contrast of the image. And they're just quick ways of you know, changing your images. You can also make your own presets once you get the hang of it, folks, and save them in. So if you know you have a particular way of using it, you can use it again and again and again. I'm not going to worry too much about the channel, but you can change individual colors. We're just going to stick with RGB, red, green, blue, which is our entire image. Now, in the input levels, folks, this will allow us to work with the shades, the tones, and the mid-tones, and then the brights, okay? So over here is our pure black. So this would be right here, the pure black of the gradient. This is the middle of my gradient, just here. And this is the pure white, which will be bang here as well. Now, for all of my photographer friends that are on, or for anyone that has ever understood how to use a histogram, this is your histogram. This is telling me where the shades and tones are in the image anyway, how much of everything is in it. So if you're used to your histogram, you will be able to use the graph a lot more. But basically, it's pure black, pure white, and mid-tones in between. So there's a lot of kind of darker tones in here, which is what the histogram is telling us, and that's around here. There's a lot of bright tones in here, and that's up here. Okay, so we can kind of see that the mid-tones, there's not many of them. That's pretty much all this is telling us if you're not used to your histogram. Okay, so folks, with this, if I want to take more control and change just the darkness of the image, I can do so. I can just change how much darkness is in the image, how much of the darker tones are in the image. Vice versa, I can take the pure whites, and I can kind of brighten the image. Now, I'm overexposing that image, so you can see that the sky is completely being destroyed here. Okay, but we can do it, and then obviously we can take the middle, and this would technically be our contrast. But we've got a lot more creative control over how specifically we want the image to look. Again, preview option, original image, and then as we change it, to get whatever you want. And that's the input. Now with the output, again, keep an eye on the kind of gradient slider I have down the bottom here, folks. I'll put these back to its default so we can kind of see exactly what's happening. The output will work in a way that, I suppose, again, very similar to the legacy version of the brightness and contrast. What we can do is we can change the output of the colors. So if I move this black, keep an eye on the black down here. As I move this, I have basically said that any color past this here is not to be in the image. So our gradient technically starts from here, as we can see. If I do it the opposite way with the white, we can basically set that again, the output levels, there's no white past this mark. And again, in the gradient there isn't, and we can see it in the image. Now, combining that with both of the input and the output is how we get full kind of contrast to our images to get whatever you're trying to do in your images. So once again, there's a lot more control in here, and there's a lot more to play around with than just two basic sliders. Can levels be used only in black and white images? I will demonstrate it on a colored image once we get through our brightness, contrast, levels, and curves, okay? Because obviously we can do it on colored images. I just demonstrate in black and white so we can see the gradient, folks. But of course we can do it on colored images. I was expecting a 50 Shades of Grey joke to come in, but Celeste was the first one I noticed anyway. Thanks very much, Celeste. I was expecting one to pop in there at some stage. Folks, I will explain these sliders, but these droppers here. Basically, they're once again, the photographers that are kind of on would be used to using what we call a grey card. If anybody's unsure what a grey card is, I will demonstrate it in a moment. But these are quick ways of setting a black point, a white point, or a grey point. And I'll demonstrate that on the colored image when I'm talking about it. But for now, is everybody okay with our levels? Okay. A lot of yeses coming in there. Perfect. Okay. So I will just cancel that down, folks, and we will look. So we've got a choice between a dog and a piano. Whatever you prefer to see. I suppose we'll go with the piano. Okay, so folks, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to image again, because we're using our destructive adjustments. And we're going to go to our curves. Mike, these images can be used on only a specific part of an image, and that's where our selections in lesson 5 will come in. So once you understand your adjustments, we will be using these in lesson 4 and lesson 5 going forward, so we can use our selections with our adjustments to make even more in-depth changes, more dynamic changes as well. Okay, so folks, again, here is our curves. It is, I'll put it in the top right hand corner. As you can see, it looks a little bit more complicated than levels or brightness and contrast. In a way, it is the next stage after it. It takes a little bit more to master than the levels, but it's nice to play around with it. It's not a bad way of altering your images, but it will take a little bit more time. So we'll stick to the basics of it. Basically, it is, as you can see, we have our output here and our input that was built into the same as levels. But this uses the histogram, which is our black and white. The graph that we're looking at, it uses basically a way of drawing a specific graph on it. It does come with presets, so we can come in here and make the image darker, and you can see that the graph has now changed to a curve. We can use a linear contrast, which gives us what we call an S-curve. I know it doesn't look like an S, but it's called an S-curve, and S-curves are used for making your contrasts in your image. Okay, so let's just go back. Here's a strong contrast so you can see how the image changes with a full S-curve in here. So I'm going to go back to default, and folks, it's as simple as this. You just click and move. So I've darkened the image there, or I can go the opposite way and I can brighten the image. You can click as many times as you want. You can put as many points on the graph as you need to be. You can drag it up and down to be wherever you want, and again we can go in for a nice S-curve. It comes with our preview option, so we can see exactly what we're doing. You can add as many points on as you want. If you're unhappy with a point, you can hit the delete key or the backspace on your keyboard. So again, I can select this one here and I can hit the backspace, and it allows me to add. Now obviously we can change the starting points of our images, which will give you a lot more control over everything again. But again, it's just another way of playing around with the brightness and the contrast. Just again, it's a lot more in depth. There's a lot more time that's needed to make it perfect. But once you master curves, you'll absolutely love it. Again, it comes with the channels, folks. So if I wanted to change the red, green, or blue specifically in an image and make that red darker, that green, that's the way the RGB works. Until you've mastered the RGB on its own, I wouldn't recommend playing around with the individuals, because you might just, confuse yourself. But feel free to play around with it when you think you're ready and really get in depth with them. Now, what we can do in here, folks, as well, is that as you see this hand icon down here, it will give me a dropper. So if I like a specific color in here that I want to change, so maybe I want to come down, you can see that on the graph, if you're looking at my graph, it will change. So let's come down to my gradient down the bottom here. And I'll start just here, which is our pure black. And as I move, the circle, it's on here, folks, okay? Keep an eye here. As I move, I can choose a point to plot. So this is our bang mid-tone, just there. So then I can come up here and change the mid-tones to whatever I want. So it's a way of plotting your points. Here's our kind of whites. We darken the whites a little bit and get whatever way we want the image itself. Do not worry, folks, I will demonstrate it on color. I will get that as well. Melissa, channel is just it's just a word for saying that color, basically like a channel of red. So all the reds in there, all of the greens, all the blues. I wouldn't worry about the definition of the word too much. I would rather if you understood how to use them. But it just basically, it's the red channel, all of the color, all of the red tones that are in your image, all of the green tones and all the blue tones. When you put those three channels together, you get the image that you see. Now, folks, honestly, obviously, again, comes with an auto option in here as well, for if you want to take the easy way out and play around with it then after that. But until you get used to your levels, I wouldn't move on to curves just yet. Play around with levels until you feel more comfortable, and then move on to that, okay? Now, I can see everybody's asking to see it on a colored image, so bear with me and I'll do that now for you, okay? Just cancel this out. We'll go and I'll open up the image here. So folks, this is just a standard foggy sky, nothing crazy to it. Again, if we zoom in, we can see that they're colored pixels. And what we're going to do is adjust it. So we're going to go Image, Adjustments, and I'll very quickly just do the brightness and contrast. Again, just change the brightness of the image, how bright we want it to be. We can change how the contrast of the image between the color and the brightness. So again, that's pretty much it, folks. It's very simple to play around with. It just takes time and practice to get used to. Okay, I'm going to cancel that, folks, and we're just going to go Image, Adjustments, and Levels. Again, we have the input color, which we can input, because a few people are confused about the input and output. So again, the output will stop how much color is in it. So again, you can see there's a lot of dark shades down in the bottom right here. If I say, I want all the darker shades to start from here, well then, those kind of darker tones will be removed from it. So I don't have a gradient on this, but you can see the colors changing. If I output the brightness, so there's no real bright shades in here, we're just changing the values of the darker shades to the whiter shades that will appear in the image. The input is where we change the brightness and contrast. You've got your mid-tones in here as well. Okay, again, folks, not something I wanted to demonstrate because it'll just confuse people, but look, there's a lot of greens in this image, or yellows. So if I start to change the color of the channel, you can see it affects that specific image color. So it's not something you should play around with unless you know exactly what you're doing. Again, folks, just because it can be used on actual colored images, the reason I use black and white is just so we know exactly what we're doing, but we can change the contrast in here. So we'll add a nice S-curve on here. Like so. And again, just a preview on and off. That's just the very subtle differences. Now, obviously, folks, I do recommend playing around with everything so you kind of get a really good idea of what you're playing around with. Every image is going to react differently, so you need to make sure that you're using specific images again and again to kind of understand what you're doing. But there is one more thing I wanted to show when it comes to your tonal side of things, and that was with the edit image adjustments. I'll just pull up the levels. Was these three options here. So they're generally used for a bit of color correction, okay? So for correcting colors in your photos. But if I use this point here, this will sample an image and set the black point for me. So I'll come in here and say I'll just choose this image here. It has basically set a black point for me. It doesn't look very nice, but it does have its uses. Again, with the white one, it will brighten the image for us. So they're quick ways of trying to do color correction and then you changing the image whatever way you want to do it. But for anyone who's familiar with a gray card, okay, for getting the perfect tones in your images, what you should do is, this is a brilliant option here. This will set an image to a gray point. So find a nice gray tone in your image. So if I select here, it has changed the image drastically. If I check down here, so basically, realistically, most images that you'll ever take, whether on your phone or professionally, will have a temperature to them. And basically, that's what we'll see in the image. So I'll just go back to our original. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll just reset it. Go back to default. And I'm going to find a nice grey tone down here, folks. So we can see this kind of has an orangey overcast on it, which is the temperature in the image. It's a morning sun. And we're going to come in here and I'm going to select a nice grey. And you can now see that it's got a blue overtone. So if I find the nicer tones in here, I can very quickly change the colour of the image to how we would have seen it with our own eyes. So I'll do a preview. This is our kind of orange overcast. We set the grey point and very quickly we can remove that orange overcast on our images to be a more realistic image. And then we can come in here and again, folks, we can kind of change how our image is perceived ourselves to kind of change how we want it to look. Okay, so how is everybody getting on with the tonal adjustments? Again, folks, they can be applied to image, any image, whether it's black or white or color. Everyone seems to be fine. A lot of yeses coming in there. Jane was the first one to type in. Thank you very much, Jane. So that means we're going to move on to our colored adjustments, okay? So we've looked at tonal adjustments. Now let's look at actually changing our colors themselves. So colored adjustments will do exactly what you guessed. They'll adjust color in your image. We can saturate colors or we can tone them down. So basically we can make them more vibrant or we can tone them down. And then we can completely change colors altogether. Keep in mind, because it is a question that will come up from somebody as I demonstrate these, of course, when we are using our selection tools, which we will learn in lesson 5, we can change specific parts of our images. We can change the colors on specific parts. We'll actually be able to do that in our next lesson fully, because I'll be showing you how to use masks as well, which we can use with our color adjustments. So lots and lots to learn ahead of you as well. Okay, so folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Photoshop again. As I said, I try to use less slides as everyone gets adjusted to Photoshop. So from now on, week 2 forward, a lot of you we'll be looking at Photoshop a lot more as well. But again, another question that might come up, folks, color adjustments can be applied to any black and white and colored images, as we've kind of seen with our black and white adjustment as well. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to jump straight into Photoshop. I'm actually going to close down some of these images, and if we need them, we can open them back up. And I do have 2 prepped and ready to go. I feel like I'm on a cooking show. But again, folks, you can see that I do have the colors down the bottom here ready to go. So again, it's just a gradient that I added on, and if I have time, I will 100% show you all how to do it very quickly in the Q&A for today's lesson, okay? Brahma coming in, what's the difference between vibrance and saturation? Emmanuel is asking the same question. So if anybody knows, feel free to type in, but I will explain it, because I may as well jump straight into it, folks, with this image here. Then we're going to go image, up the top, adjustments, for our destructive adjustments. And we're going to move into the kind of colored section of our adjustments. And we'll start off with the vibrance. Again, 2 very simple sliders, but they actually do a lot more, they're a lot more powerful than brightness and contrast. They do a lot more in your actual images than you might expect, even though there's only 2 sliders. So since a few people are asking what the difference is between vibrance and saturation, I may as well explain. So basically, vibrance is a way of adjusting our colored images, okay? So basically, it's a way of adjusting the colors in here without overdoing it. I suppose a very quick demonstration would probably make it easier. So I'll start with saturation. Saturation, if I move this slider up to the very top, we can see that I've basically turned this lovely girl into an Oompa Loompa. So I'll zoom in. Oh, bear with me 1 second, folks. Just going to zoom in on her so we can see it. Image, adjustments, and we're going to go vibrance. And I'm going to Oompa Loompa this girl, give her a really, really bad fake tan. So what I've done here, folks, if you look at the actual gradient, so I'll move it very slowly from 0 up. And keep a look at the colored gradient that I have down the bottom here. And as I move it, you can see the colors becoming more intense and basically eradicating the less intense versions of that color until we get our horrible, disgusting, fake tanned image here. And basically that's what I've done is I've oversaturated the image. So basically I've made the image, the colors in the image become too much. If I go the opposite way, I will be removing color. So I can start toning the colors down until eventually where I get to the idea that there's no colors, it's just a black and white image. This is called desaturation, or removing colors basically, okay? But it's desaturation. Now the vibrance is a clever way of stopping you from doing both. So with the vibrance slider, what it will allow us to do, if I bring it up to the max, as you can see, the colors do get more intense, but they don't get overly intense. So vibrance will keep the already intense colors in your images to a kind of standstill. They obviously will get a little bit more saturated, but it more focuses on the colors that are not as vibrant. And if I go the opposite way, it once again will keep the kind of oversaturated images, the really highly detailed colors that are in there, and it won't remove all of them. So it's another way of basically making these kind of pastel colors instead. And as you can see from the gradient slider down the bottom, my little rainbow down here is a lot more of a pastel colors instead of our full vibrant. And this, you can use both of them together to get whatever tone you're trying to get. So this hasn't gone fully black and white. Instead, we've made her look a little bit like a corpse, but you can see it's actually not a bad image, even though she does look a little bit sick at the moment. Okay. Okay, so we'll put this back to 0. And I suppose that's pretty much our demonstration of vibrance and saturation. But with an image like this, folks, subtlety is key when it comes to these kind of things. So we would up the vibrance a little bit to give her a little bit of more color, but we don't want to overdo it in terms of, you know, once again, making her look like she's orange. So subtlety is key. If you've noticed that maybe the person, your model, is a little bit paler than she needs to be. Now, Photoshop has plenty of ways. Obviously, we have our dodge and burn tool, so we can kind of burn her to give her a little bit of a tan. But we can also, you know, bring the vibrance of the colors in. So again, the grass in here, if I want the grass to be a little bit greener. Okay, everybody's singing grass is greener on the other side now from that. But you can see here, folks, that we can kind of bring those colors to life. Again, we can desaturate the image as we kind of go. You can play around with it to get the most out of your image. Let's just preview. This is our base. Very subtle touches here, folks. The grass is greener. The skin is a little bit brighter. The lips are a little bit redder, if you're looking for something to focus on. So you can see the changes in here. And the hair actually becomes a lot more brown as well. And that's just a very subtle change with the vibrance slider. Now, I'll cancel that. And I may as well jump to the other image, folks. And what we'll do is we'll demonstrate the hue and saturation. And then I'll do a bit of, you know, I'll open up a few images and demonstrate whatever you need me to demonstrate going with a chat box, okay? So in the hue and saturation, you've seen me use it before for changing the girl's hair color. But I'm going to demonstrate it on this image again. There's a lot of greens. There's a lot of blue. This image has already been edited. I got this off pixabay.com, folks. So if in case you're looking for images, obviously you can go to Pixabay yourselves. But this is already an edited image. I can see it's too green to be the way it is. But the joys of it is that we can go image, adjustments, and hue and saturation. Now, again, it gives us a little bit more of a complicated version of our vibrance. We get a little bit more to play around with. We don't get the vibrance part of it itself, but we do get saturation. So we know that if I jump straight in, I can turn this image black and white, or I can oversaturate the colors. put that back to 0. Comes with presets, folks. So if I wanted to go for a kind of sepia or sepia, depending what way you say it, we can do that. It comes with a yellow boost to boost those colors in the image. We can increase the saturation. There's lots we can do. And again, you can create your own custom ones when you want to, okay? In here, folks, with the master, this you can play with rather than the RGB. Okay, you can see that we actually get reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas. And I will be using these, so you'll see them in action in a moment. But we want to focus on the hue, the saturation, and the lightness. I have my gradient slider down the bottom here for my demonstration purposes with yourselves. But these two actual gradient sliders here will do the exact same thing. So as I change my hue, okay, you can see my gradient moving, but you can see the alignment here has changed. So basically I'm replacing this blue with this kind of shade. I would be replacing these greens with these kind of shades, and that's the idea of it. So as I move, what was green, which is here, is starting to get a lot more darker colors. What was blue, which would be obviously around here, is becoming a lot more green. And that's the idea of how we can very, very quickly change colors. Again, with our selection tools, we can make specific areas. With our masking, which we will look at in our next lesson, we can make specific areas, individual colors and everything like that. Saturation works the exact same. Lightness works a little bit different than what you might think. It does look like it's going to be brightness, but instead it actually kind of like changes the entire image to be darker, more like the legacy format of the brightness and contrast instead. And the three of them together are going to be absolutely wonderful. I use it a lot in this course, folks, to show you the power of how quickly you can change anything. Like so, we're going to come up here to our master list, and we're going to change this option to greens. So now we can see, folks, that down here, something has happened. Instead, I'm locking the greens, meaning that I'm only going to change the greens in the image. So when I change my hue and saturation, the sky stays the same, but the greens in the image change. So look, can we see the kind of blue overtone here? They change. Now, what you might also notice is that if I choose the yellows and I change this, we're changing the other area within here. And that is got to do with our pixels. So at the moment, if I put this back to 0, go back to our master list, what we see here, well, what you should be seeing anyway, folks, is green. But there's actually a lot of yellow in here as well. So when we're changing just green, it doesn't particularly change the way we want it to. So I want to change all of this green and I want to leave the sky blue. So I'm going to choose either from my master list, or I'm going to use the hand icon here and we can select a specific color, and you can see that it's chose yellows. And then I'm going to come down to my locked in area and I'm just going to click and drag. And this will allow me to lock in all of this area here instead. And I can change the color of our images. So we've made the color a lot more vibrant in terms of how green it is. We can desaturate that full area. Again, look at my slider down the bottom here. My gradient has changed to completely grey where the greens usually are, but the rest of the colors in the image have stayed. We can come in here to lightness and change our green to a more whitish color, making it look like it's been snowing. Or we can completely make it dark, which just ruins the image, but you get the idea. And that is the joys of using the hue and saturation, folks. If there's a lot of one color in the image, we can control it. Even if there's not a lot of one color in the image. So let's just basically go back to our zeros. We'll pick our cyans. And what we'll do is we will brighten or darken the sky. And you can see it changing just here. Or maybe I'll change the color of that. And you can see it changing there as well. Now, I'll just demonstrate that again very quickly, folks, on this image of the girl as well. So what we'll do is we can see that we have all this grass here. So what we'll do is we'll go Image, Adjustments, uSaturation. So again, a lot of the green in the image, what we can do is we can come in here and choose. It should actually give me a lot of yellows. Yeah, so see the way it's actually chose yellow instead. So I'll stretch it out so we have a bit of green in here. And then what we'll do is we'll desaturate the image. So now the focus is on the girl instead. The grass looks like it's dead. And the girl is what is in the focus of the image. But the leaves, the brown leaves, stay the same. The brown of her hair and the reds and yellows and browns that are in her skin will stay the same as well. Or we can completely, again folks, we can very quickly change the color. But this will start to pick up, so there's more vibrant. The kind of blues, it will start to pick up on the other tones. So you need to be careful not to affect her skin tone as much with the images as well. Do it again. Okay, one more time, folks. I suppose what I'll do is I'll open up the image that I was using at the very start of the lesson, which is just my blues and greens again, because once again, they're very easy to demonstrate off, folks. They're just images that we see day to day everywhere we go. You always see these kind of colors maxed together in the real life. So we're going to go Image, Adjustments, uSaturation. I'm going to choose the greens, which will come up with yellows. I'm just going to lock in a little bit more of a variety here. And I'll use the U slider, folks, so we can make it look a little bit less green, or we can make it look at more green. We could even go completely down here and give ourselves purple grass, blue grass. Okay, and we can just completely change how our images look. If you want to just make the color stand out a bit more, you can use the saturation. If you want to dull down the color, again, desaturate. If you want to make it brighter, white, darker, black, and they all work together to get something that looks a little bit like that. Francis, that is the end of the lesson, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But I always do my Q&A after the lesson, so you only have to stay for the Q&A if you want to. Okay. Again, folks, something that you need to kind of play around with. What do the margins in the sliders represent? This is the locked in area. As you can see, it'll start to constrain how much color should be in here. So as you can see, if I start to bring these up, it brings a little bit more color in. Now, just going to move on just in case people do need to shoot off at 8 o'clock, folks, and then I'll jump in and do whatever you need me to do in the Q&A as well. In our next lesson, we're going to be looking at layers and masking. And this will allow us to completely control specific areas. So I'll show off a little bit in the Q&A just so, because people are asking how do you select specific areas, and that's perfectly fine. But we're going to be looking at a more creative side with our masking and using all of the different layers like our non-destructive adjustments as well. So it's going to be a lot more fun. So in our next lesson, folks, we're going to do something like this. Take both of these images, compile them together to get something that will look, again, by using masking, as if they're part of the same image. If you are looking to add more pixels into an image, that will make your image bigger than what it already is. So if you come up to Image, EBA, and go to Image Size, what we'll do is we'll change this to pixels. This is how many pixels are in this image. Okay, 1920 by 1296. So that's a lot of pixels. A lot of pixels in this one image. If I add more pixels in or take pixels out, it's called upsampling or downsampling, which will change the size of your image altogether. So just keep that in mind. Oh, the gradient slider. Thank you very much, Salwa. I will indeed show you the gradient slider. Okay, so I'll just use this image, folks, and this is what we're going to be looking at in our next lessons anyway with our layers. But if you want to make your own very quickly, okay, all you have to do is take your, I'm going to unlock this layer. I'm going to take the crop tool. We're just going to crop down a little bit, like so, and hit OK. So we've cropped that we have this extra little bit of area to our image. I'm going to grab my selection tools, which you'll learn all about in lesson 5, and I'm going to select the said area, okay, which is what we want. And I'm just going to get my gradient tool, which is a black and white gradient, and draw a line across. And we have a gradient. It's as simple as that. And in the gradient tool, folks, there's ways of selecting many different types of gradients. So if you're looking for your colored gradient, that is it there. So it's just a crop, a selection, and a gradient. But again, folks, if that confuses you, we're going to learn all about layers in our next lesson and selections in lesson 5. Celeste, if you increase picture size by adding pixels in again and again and again, you will be decreasing quality of the image because Photoshop is trying to add in colored pixels where they were not original, so it will try match it in. So stuff like the sky